Chapter 17. "My lord, the ladies are here." King Caspian lifted his head and realized that Jamie, his most devoted adviser, was talking to him. His thoughts were racing. Vampires didn't become ill, but Caspian felt like he was under the weather. "What are you talking about, Jamie?" he asked, more harshly than he'd intended. Lately he had been very hostile toward everyone, and he'd offended a few people unintentionally. Deep down, he knew that Cindy had broken his heart. It was as if he was reliving the moment when his beautiful wife had passed away and his world collapsed. "The ladies you asked for, my lord. They are all waiting for you in the main hall," Jamie repeated, staring at Caspian with concern. Moments later, he remembered that a few days ago he had asked Jamie to find suitable women he could meet beforehand. He'd made this hasty decision straight after he learned that his Cindy was marrying another man. He still couldn't comprehend why he didn't stop her. He'd spent only a few hours with her. She'd given him that cryptic message. He now understood that this wasn't her decision, but he wasn't certain of what he could do. He just wasn't ready to accept that he'd lost her forever. He frowned, wondering what the hell was wrong with him. He didn't want to speak to other women, but it was too late to back away, and he hated disappointing humans. "Right, I should be there in a minute. Just give them some champagne," Caspian said, dragging his hand through his hair. Even his body felt tired and drained. This had never happened to him before. It was as if he was rotting from the inside out, losing part of his human soul. Caspian was an impulsive man, and he hated when things didn't go his way. He knew that this was one of the weak traits of his character. He hadn't really thought of the consequences when he'd gone about announcing that he was planning to remarry. Cindy had made him furious, and he thought he would punish her, knowing she was at the ball and would have heard his speech. He owned her body during the first ball. Then in the morning he discovered that someone had stolen his priceless and most beloved painting. He was furious, and that just added more bitterness to his mood. General Davies was interviewing his servants, but Caspian was certain he wasn't going to get anywhere. He didn't believe Cindy was involved, but he'd sensed magical energy around, and this had him feeling uneasy. Jamie nodded, bowed, and then left the king alone. Caspian wasn't prepared to greet a bunch of women who'd arrived to meet him. Regardless of how many more Jamie invited over, he only wanted one woman, Cinderella. 5 minutes later, he was up on his feet, walking through the long corridor. He approached the door, counting at least 10 ladies. He opened the door and stepped inside, releasing his glamour. Each one of the ladies stopped talking all of a sudden and stared at him, looking excited. The king had to admit that they were all very beautiful, and Jamie had done well, because they were mostly around his age. Still, Caspian didn't care for any of them. "I'm afraid there has been a mistake, my dear ladies. The king is not feeling well today, and had to retire to his chamber. Please follow Jamie back toward the castle gate," he stated, using his vampire abilities to make them believe he wasn't the king. Several seconds later, the women began walking through the door, looking disappointed and a little confused. Jamie was already directing them toward the lower parts of the castle. The king went back to his chamber, feeling conflicted. He hadn't really slept much over the past several days. He was hungry, too, but he wasn't ready to leave the castle tonight. Cindy had awoken him from a dream. It seemed as though Caspian had been stuck in his own routine for 20 years, just wading through life. He thought of his dead wife, trying to remember their brief time together. The craving for human blood wasn't going away, and a few hours later he decided that he needed to satisfy his hunger. He needed to find out what had truly happened to his painting. It was the only one that he cared for. The others were only part of his valuable collection. The Lourdes was sentimental, and it broke him when he'd seen an empty place that night after he'd spent time with Cindy. Caspian was still a young vampire, but he could sense when someone was lying to him, and he knew there was something significant that Cindy wasn't telling him. Her stepmother had some sort of control over her. Caspian was ready to fight for her, but he needed to get to the bottom of the truth. He quickly changed into a guard's uniform and then transformed his appearance into the new officer who'd arrested her outside Lord Gerard's home. It was the perfect opportunity for Caspian to sneak out of the castle that evening. Eric was travelling to another kingdom to meet Riga's parents. The preparations for the wedding were well underway, and Caspian needed to take his mind off Cindy. The anger inside him was transparent and raw. He wasn't prepared to give up on her, but he had no idea what to do. He thought that once he satisfied his hunger, he would be able to think more clearly. Half an hour later, he was outside the castle gates. The air was cool, and the temperature was a bit on the low side tonight. The king inhaled oxygen into his lungs, smelling the faint scent of human blood. He never killed his victims. He drank their blood, and then he made them forget. This way, no one ever suspected anything. His senses were much sharper tonight, and he left the castle grounds soon enough, entering the forest. He heard humans around, mostly peasants and a few prostitutes who were fooling around in the bushes. Caspian avoided the built-up areas until he reached the outskirts of town. He spotted a young man who was tending to his horses in the stables, humming a well-known ballad to himself. The king's throat was burning, and he decided not to wander off anywhere else. Using his inhuman speed, he caught the man by his throat and sank his fangs into the crook of his neck. His blood was delicious, and he instantly felt better as the precious liquid began flowing down his throat. The man was most likely in his mid-20s, and the king glamoured him right away so he wouldn't feel any pain. His vision and hearing became hypersensitive, and he was able to sense when the man's pulse began to slow, an indication that Caspian needed to stop draining him. Caspian was a vampire, but he still considered himself a good man. Before he was turned into a blood-sucking monster, he worked as a carpenter in another kingdom in order to support his parents. As soon as he laid the man on the ground, he heard a woman's scream. He quickly covered the 2 puncture wounds with his blood and ran into the forest. The peasant boy would be unconscious for some time, but once he woke up, he would believe he'd fallen asleep. The king's strength returned from the blood's nourishment, and it didn't take him long to locate the woman in need. "Just try and touch me, you dirty pig, and I will rip off your bollocks with my teeth," the king heard the woman snarl. Behind the trees, he could see that she was surrounded by at least 3 dirty-looking men. Caspian assessed that they were the local thieves that one of his officers had told him about several weeks ago. They had been terrorizing the people from around town for quite some time now, and someone needed to teach them a lesson. The woman had a small knife in her hands. She wore a red, silky cloak with a hood covering her head, and the king had to admit that she was quite beautiful. Even if she knew how to defend herself, she wouldn't stand a chance against all those men. All 3 thieves were stronger and most likely much quicker than her. They all laughed at her, approaching her from each side. A dark-haired thief with multiple scars on his face tried to grab her, but she cut his palm. Caspian was impressed and thought that she handled herself well. At the same time, another crept up on her from behind and quickly wrapped his elbow around her throat. The third one didn't waste any time. He pulled off her red cloak, grabbing her breasts, while she tried to untangle herself, screaming obscenities and threatening to kill him. "You need to get down on your knees, my love, and suck my dick. It's been a long time. Besides, I like girls with a dirty mouth," the one she'd just cut said, and then licked her face. The thief behind her laughed out loud. The girl was swearing, trying to kick the one who held her, but she wasn't strong enough to fight them all. The king had seen enough. It was time for him to reveal himself. He stepped out from behind the trees and whistled loudly. His frustration over what had happened with Cindy had taken a toll on his mood, and he was ready to hurt those scumbags. "Gentlemen, I suggest you step away from this lady as soon as possible, or you'll certainly regret it," he said loudly. The girl looked at him, and Caspian noticed her incredible honey-gold eyes. The thieves backed away from the girl, startled by his appearance, and the two of them lifted their sharp knives, glancing at each other with apprehension. They didn't care for his uniform. "I don't need your help, stranger. Go away before they kill you," the girl snapped, and Caspian was surprised. She wasn't scared, and still wanted to fight. Each of the thieves wanted to rape her. The king could smell their lust, and could see the thrill of excitement in their eyes. "Listen to the girl, Hunter, or feel the sharpness of my blade," the one with the scarred face stated, spitting on the ground. His two companions laughed, and the girl looked around desperately, like she was considering running away. Caspian wiped his mouth, still tasting the peasant's blood on his tongue. The scarred thief attacked first, launching himself and trying to stab the king in his gut. He wasn't fast enough. Using his inhuman speed, Caspian bit his collarbone. The thief crashed to the ground, having no idea what had happened, dropping his blade. He was instantly unconscious. At the same time, the girl kicked the thief, who had his elbow around her neck, right between his legs. He had no other choice but to release her, moaning in agony. In a matter of seconds, the girl vanished somewhere between the trees. Caspian thought she was fast, but he couldn't chase her through the forest because the other two thieves were on him now. He kicked one, planting his foot in his chest, and then punched him, breaking his nose. The man struggled. His eyes rolled into the back of his head, and then he went down like the first one. He bit the smallest one with his sharp fangs, but didn't drink from him. Caspian sensed that his blood wasn't pure, so he left him lying on the ground. He needed to remember to send his guards out later to arrest the thieves. They wouldn't be waking up for the next several hours. It was late, and the moon finally appeared from behind the clouds, shining brightly. He was still a little concerned about the girl with the red cloak, so he set off to find her. The girl wasn't far, and with his vampire abilities, he was already tracking her down. He sensed a few wolves in the area, and suddenly the king was concerned about the girl's safety. He started moving through the bushes and circulating between the trees until he heard the wolves howling in the distance. Then, out of nowhere, someone jumped on him, knocking him off his feet. It took him several moments to realize that he was being attacked by a petite, dark-haired girl. He recognized her scent from earlier on, and now she held a small knife pressed to his throat. He was impressed. She was faster than he expected. "Who sent you, scum? I know you've been following me around for hours now," she snarled at him, threatening to cut him. The king wanted to laugh, staring at her beautiful golden eyes and dark hair. She was a local and knew her way around the forest well, so he assumed she knew Cindy. Caspian had wasted enough time. Tonight he was planning to find her. After what had happened between them, he wasn't prepared to just let her go, and wouldn't accept that she was marrying someone else. "I haven't been following you. I was searching for someone, and I saw that you were in trouble." He chuckled, and the girl only narrowed her eyes at him with anger. Caspian believed she wouldn't hesitate to kill him if needed. "And do you think I'm just going to believe you?" she snapped. "Who are you looking for?" "Cindy, the blonde girl with beautiful blue eyes. Do you know her?" he asked, hopeful. The girl studied him for a long while, and her expression softened a little. The king knew he'd struck gold. It seemed that she knew his Cindy. Eventually, she pulled her knife away and hid it in her boot. "What do you want with her? Her stepmother has her by the throat. She has to marry some farmer soon," the girl said, shaking her head. Caspian's emotions were running wild, and he was ready to shake the girl to make her tell him everything. Somehow, he managed to restrain himself. The girl with the red cloak finally lifted herself off him, and they both stood from the ground. She had a sharp gaze, and the king knew he'd made a good decision to go for a hunt tonight. "Tell me about this marriage," he requested, straining his muscles. He knew Cindy hadn't told him everything. "There's nothing to tell. That fool is marrying the fat pig. Otherwise she might end up in prison. Her stepmother made it look like she stole the king's rare painting. Ida set everything up, most likely paid someone in the castle to move the painting to Cindy's room. It's too late to stop any of it. She already left with her stepmother and that farmer for another kingdom. This marriage has something to do with her father's huge estate. Ida wants to make sure that everything will go to her. Her father put some sort of clause in his will, his last dying wish or something. Cindy has been trying to find a way around it, but her only option is escaping from Farrington.